So they vamped up the weirdness, slightly toned down the racism, although it's still present. Not gonna lie, I was thoroughly confused by the time this episode went off, but I liked it. So Lovecraft Country episode 2 pretty much picks up right where it left off in episode 1, where they find themselves in this huge mansion. We have Tick, Uncle George, and Letitia in this huge mansion where Tick's dad led them to. By the initial look of things, Uncle George and Letitia are living large. They've moved on up to the east side. Uncle George has an abundance of books to read. Letitia gets to live out all of her cosplay fantasies with a garb suspiciously all in her size. Not Tick though. Tick is really just trying to rationalize what happened the night before, because this is literally the day after episode 1. So Tick is contemplating on, exactly what happened. He's trying to figure things out. Really, he's just trying to make sense of everything that happened the night before. So now when I tell you that they really vamped up the weirdness, I'm not exaggerating. They vamped it up like a lot. I mean, there are things in this episode that is just straight up mind-boggling, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the things that they showed in this episode may have turned off some of the viewers, more of the casual viewers. So we get an explanation about what those creatures were in episode 1. They were like vampire dogs. They're pretty much guard dogs for this castle, guard dogs for this family full of wizards and cultists who are actually led by President Fitzgerald himself, and he actually feeds himself to them. I mean, it's weird, man. It's strange. Like it's weird. It just might not be for everyone. And when I say that they're wizards, I mean that literally. They can do literal magic. Like, they have Uncle George and Letty under this spell that it seems like it prevents them from remembering anything that's supernatural. And these wizards can they can just turn it off whenever they want. It's like an on and off switch. They portray that it's kind of funny how they show that. Tick is like all freaking out, like, he wanted, like, remove the spell, and then she says, okay, it's done, and all of a sudden you can hear Uncle George and Letitia in the background screaming. And that actually explains why we see them in the beginning of the episode acting all, excited and happy and giddy, Uncle George and Letitia. They don't know that they're under a spell. They don't remember the events from episode 1. Now, while this episode does eclipse the weirdness and the strange things that happened in episode 1, this is far beyond episode 1, the weirdness from episode 1. It never really reached a moment of intensity. That moment of intensity that episode 1 had, that car chase that I was explaining to you guys, the one where, they were going 25 miles per hour, they had to cross the county line. You never get that feeling of intensity in this episode. But at the same time, there are scenes in this episode that are more disturbing. For example, there's a scene that involves Letitia and a snake, and it's really unsettling. You're not quite sure exactly what happened in that scene. They don't show fully what happened, but you kind of get the sense that she was, impacted by what happened in that scene, because of the following scene when she's in the hallway and the way her body language is and the way she's kind of acting. You kind of have the sense that something horrible probably happened to her. The show does a good job of not confirming or denying that, but just reading her body language, you can see that she was uncomfortable. Insert Michael K. Williams, Omar himself. I'll never get tired of seeing Michael K. Williams on screen. He is Tick's father, and apparently they were holding him hostage, and they actually forced him to write that letter to Tick, getting Tick to come to rescue him for reasons far too strange for this YouTube video. You can really see Jordan Peele's involvement in the show, really, especially in this episode. You can see his influence on just the screen. You get familiar vibes. If you've seen any of his previous work, then you understand what I'm saying, which is really cool to see, as well as J.J. Abrams as well. You can see his work as well shining through in this episode. He kind of has a disjointed storytelling style. And one thing this show has really done a good job that I'm impressed by is really illustrating the importance of reading, and that knowledge is power. For example, there was a scene in episode 1 where Tick, Letitia, and Uncle George, they went to a diner that was supposed to be one of those safe places that Uncle George maps out in his routes. And turns out that when they get there, it's, majority, it's owned by all white people. And Tick is an intelligent guy. He's examining the diner, and he's looking around, and he can tell that something is odd about the place. And then he asks Uncle George, hey, Uncle George, remind me why the White House is white. Then Uncle George explains that white is painted over burn marks. You can't see any burn marks when it's painted white. You know, and that's something that Uncle George learned from, you know, a book. That's something he learned from reading. Same for Tick. And so that actually gives Tick, you know, incentive to, you know, that something is not right. They may be in danger here. So that place that Uncle George had mapped out actually was previously black owned, but they did something terrible to the previous owner, who was a black woman, and they burned the place down and repainted it all white and just took over. And in this episode, there was this one scene where the cult, they all had like this little gathering, and they were all just chilling, eating President Fitzgerald's spleen. Don't eat that. And Uncle George and Tick just kind of tick over the room, just spouting out these facts about their history, and you know, they're fully aware of what the cult is, and they're fully aware of who they are, where they come from. So they kind of just take over the room, and it's cool to see. And it's because they know their history. My point being that pretty much every situation that they've been in, they've been able to navigate because of some kind of literature they learned or read, whether it's history, ancestral, sci-fi, and that's something I really dig about the show. So although the racism did kind of take a back seat to the sci-fi element of the show in this episode, it's still very prevalent and it's still present. You can see it clear as day. It wasn't that blatant, you know, racist, you know, rhetoric that they were throwing out in episode 1. It was more closer to like present day racism, where it's like subtle and low key, but you know, ignorant at the same time. You can just tell the expression on Uncle George, Letitia, and Tick's face when someone says something racist. They're just looking at each other like, okay, right. Like they can't really do anything about it because they know that they're in danger, but they're like, right. So now this episode actually gives us our first character death. Is this character actually dead? I don't know. But I kind of looked at it like an Avengers kind of situation, because there's also another scene where we could have had another character death, but it turns out that character is not dead at all. They're just fine. You know how like in Avengers when, you know, Thanos snapped everybody out of existence, or half the universe out of existence, but you know that they're not, you knew they weren't really dead. They're not dead like, but when Black Widow, you know, when she jumped off the cliff to get the Soul Stone, and Gamora did the same. Well, she didn't jump, she was tossed, but you understand what I'm saying? Like they're actually like really dead. I kind of got that same feeling in this episode. It seems like this character is actually dead, which sucks because I like the character a lot. And that's something that actually kind of surprised me, because this is only episode 2 and we've already had a major character death. I mean, that's the rare thing. I would say that this episode was a little more straightforward in their storytelling than episode 1, even though it was kind of hard to understand, but you got the gist of it. The more you watched it, you understood, okay, so President Fitzgerald and their little cult, they're trying to do this and that, and which is, it's a weird thing, and they need Tick to do it. But the episode definitely did bring on a lot more questions than it does have answers. But you know, that's part of the viewing experience for a show like this, trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together before the show actually gives them to you. And that's something I've always kind of enjoyed about these kind of shows, like especially like when Westworld came out, everyone was watching Westworld, and it was like there were so many like there are so many conspiracies out there about, you know, what this means and what that means, and I'm kind of getting that same vibe from this show. Yeah, so let me know if you guys are going to be sticking through the weirdness, because I have a feeling that it's just going to get weirder and weirder from here on. If so, that's great, and I'll see you next time for episode 3.